The afternoon light slanted across Northwest 10th Avenue in Portland's Pearl District. Briony Cassidy stepped out of Andina with two board members, still mid-conversation about Tokyo terms. A dark green Ford pickup, 2 decades old, sat in the loading zone across the street. The man at the tailgate, in flannel and sawdust, was carrying a finished walnut cabinet into the antique shop next door. Briony stopped. Her voice rose enough for the sidewalk to hear. "Delivery vehicles go around back. This isn't a freight platform." The man looked up. 1 second. Then he kept walking, cabinet steady in his arms. "Stay with this one. Before it ends, the woman on the sidewalk will know exactly what she walked past today." 5 hours later, the light in southeast Portland fell soft across the cedar floor of Mercer Woodworks. The shop sat on a quiet stretch of Belmont, 3 blocks from the river. Auden had backed the Ford in and unloaded what was left in the bed. Chisels in a roll, 2 clamps, the empty wood crate that had held the walnut piece that morning. The shop smelled of varnish and fresh oak. Wren sat on the second step of a folding ladder near the window, drawing into a small box of birch she had been sanding all week. She had her father's quiet. She also had her mother's habit of looking up exactly when someone was about to speak. "You were gone longer," she said. "Traffic on the bridge." She accepted this and went back to her drawing. He hung his jacket on a peg. Beside it, a work shirt older than the jacket, older than the shop itself. On its left shoulder there was a circular patch, faded almost to gray, the embroidery only faintly visible if you knew where to look. Wren had noticed it before. "What's the old patch from?" "Just an old shirt." He didn't slow as he said it. "From a long time ago." She studied him for a second, then accepted that too. The phone rang. Auden looked at the screen. The number was not saved, but he knew it the way a person knows a song from one bar. He had not seen those digits light up in 18 months. He pressed the phone to his ear. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was older. Calm, steady, with the small fissure of a man who had waited longer than he should have to make the call. "I need you. Tomorrow morning." The old building. Auden was quiet for a long second. He looked at Wren, small and focused, lining her pencil along a curve. He did not say the man's name out loud. "I'll be there at 9. The line went dead. He stood at the counter for a while. Then he sat down on the step beside his daughter. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Where are you going tomorrow?" He did not look at her. He watched the shavings she had brushed into a neat pile. To see an old friend. She accepted this the way she had accepted the other things, without pushing. She added a line to her drawing. Across the river, on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in the Pearl District, Briony Cassidy stood at the window with a glass of seltzer she had not yet sipped. Below her, the street lamps were starting to come up along Northwest 10th. She thought about the antique shop and the man with sawdust on his shoulder for 10 seconds. Then she let it go. The way a person lets go of small irritations to make room for the larger ones. She had a Tokyo delegation arriving at 9 in the morning, and a partnership contract worth $60 million to walk them through. She did not give the man another thought. In southeast Portland, Auden sat with his daughter until the light went golden. Then he stood, opened the shop door, and walked out to the truck Helena had picked with him 11 years ago, the spring of the year they married. Wren went to bed at 9. Auden stood at the doorway a moment, listening to her breath settle, then closed the door without making the latch click. In the shop, he kept the overhead lights off and turned on the workbench lamp. The cone of yellow lit the planer, the row of chisels, the half-finished side table for a client in Lake Oswego. He did not work on it. He pulled out the bottom drawer and lifted out a leather envelope softened by time. Inside, one photograph. A garage in Tigard. Summer, 2011. He was 25 and standing with a roll of blueprints in his arms. Across from him, half visible at the edge of the frame, an older man held a paper cup of coffee and laughed at something off camera. Behind them, the lathe and the workbench they had built that month from scrap pine. On the back of the photo, in handwriting that did not belong to anyone in the picture, Helena's, careful and slanted, written 4 years later when he had shown her the photograph one evening after dinner, and she had wanted to label it for him. 3 words, Day 1, 2011. The company logo hung on a piece of plywood behind them in the picture, but the angle of the light made it hard to read. He looked at it anyway. He always did. He sat down in the chair at the bench. The kettle had gone cold an hour ago. He did not get up to refill it. He thought about a kitchen. It was the spring of 2016, late afternoon, the kind of slant of light that turns ordinary linoleum almost gold. Helena had set down her keys, her bag, and the manila folder from the neurologist on the table, in that order. He had been pouring water for the kettle and stopped with the pitcher in his hand. She had not cried. She rarely did. She had put her hand over his on the counter and said, "Don't stay because you're worried about me. Stay if you still want to, but if you go, go for the three of us." There was no third person in the room yet. Ren would not arrive for another 8 months, but Helena had said 3. She had already decided. He had only had to decide to keep up with her. He nodded once. That was how they made the decision together. He put the photo back in the leather envelope. He sat with his hands flat on the bench for a long time. Then he stood, took the old work shirt off its peg, and laid it flat on the bench. The circular patch on the left shoulder had faded so far that the letters under the embroidery were only a feeling, not a word. He touched the patch once with 2 fingers, the way a man touches the lid of a box he isn't going to open. He hung the shirt back up. He had not walked into that building in 8 years. Tomorrow he would walk into it. And most of the people inside would not know who he was. He would let them not know. Until he couldn't anymore. Across the river, in a corner office on the 42nd floor, Briony Cassidy was finishing a 4th pass through the Tokyo briefing. She did not look up when her assistant left for the night. She did not look up when the cleaning crew came through. She had no reason in the world to think about a man with sawdust on his shoulder, and so she did not. She made one final note in the margin of the briefing and turned out the light. In southeast Portland, Auden walked out of the shop, put his hand on the warm hood of the Ford, and stood there until the streetlights ticked on. Wednesday morning came up clean over Mount Hood. By 8:50, the lobby of the Cassidy Mercer Tower in the Pearl District was already moving at the pace it kept on every day that mattered. Briony stood near the south windows with the Tokyo delegation, 5 engineers and 1 chief of staff from the Tokyo Institute of Medical Research. She had walked them through the Founders Gallery on the 2nd mezzanine an hour earlier. She was on the 3rd bullet point of the operational handoff when the front doors opened. Auden Mercer walked into the lobby in the same flannel shirt and the same boots he had worn on Belmont the previous day. Briony saw him at 8 meters. Her face set. She crossed to him on heels she had not stopped wearing in 2 years of being CEO. She kept her voice professional, but it carried. "Sir, I told you yesterday, the delivery dock is at the rear of the building. Today is no different." Auden did not answer her. He turned to the security desk. Matthias Doyle, head of building security for 18 years, had recognized him at the first step. He stood and came around the desk with the bearing of a man who had once worn a uniform he respected. He stopped 3 paces from Auden, did not extend a hand, and said it clearly, so that the marble carried the sound. "Mr. Mercer, the chairman is waiting upstairs. He asked me to bring you up myself." Briony's mouth opened, then closed. "Mr." The word landed wrong in her own ear. She turned her head a degree toward the wall behind the reception desk. The word mark there was 20 feet wide. She had walked past it twice a day for the better part of a decade. Cassidy Mercer. The private elevator chimed. Her father stepped out. He was in his charcoal suit, the same one the delegation had been shown a photograph of, on the 2nd mezzanine an hour ago, identified as Hollis Cassidy, chairman of the board. He walked the length of the lobby without slowing. He stopped in front of Auden, and then, in front of the Tokyo delegation and the 2 board members standing near the elevator bank and a receptionist who had begun to lift her phone and then thought better of it, he embraced Auden. The kind of embrace one man gives another man when there has been a great deal of time and very few words between them. "You came," Hollis said. Auden held the embrace a count longer than the lobby expected. Then he stepped back. He nodded once. Hollis turned to the delegation. His English took on the precision he used for foreign partners. "Forgive me. May I introduce someone? This is Auden Mercer. 15 years ago, in a rented garage in Tigard, he and I built the company whose name is on the wall behind us. The M in Cassidy Mercer is his." The senior engineer of the delegation, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Sato, did not show surprise so much as confirmation. He inclined his head toward Auden in a half-bow. "Differential pressure sensor patent, 2013. I cited your work in my dissertation." His English was careful. He meant it. Auden returned the bow with a smaller one. He did not speak. Briony stood where she was. The lobby's morning light had reached the marble at her feet without her noticing. Hollis put his arm around Auden's shoulder and walked him toward the private elevator. Briony fell in step behind them. She did not look at Matthias as she passed. She did not look at the 2 board members near the elevator either. She looked once at the word mark on the wall. Then the elevator doors closed. The office on 42 had not been redecorated in 7 years. Hollis Cassidy kept it that way. The bookshelves were full and unfashionable. The chair behind the desk was older than 2 of his vice presidents. Brioni sat to the left of her father's desk, her back straight, her hands folded. Auden took the chair across from Hollis. The door closed behind them, and the lobby noise of 3 minutes ago might as well have been a memory. Hollis spoke first, to his daughter, in the voice he had used when she was 12 and had asked a hard question at the dinner table. Auden and I founded this company together, in 2011, in a rented garage in Tigard. He was a sensor engineer with a patent application and no money. I had money and 40 years of medical instruments, and very little patience for the way that industry was being run. We built something. For 5 years, he paused. He was looking at Brioni, not at Auden. In 2016, his wife was diagnosed with a progressive neurological condition. He spent the next 2 years stepping down from his role and dividing his shares back to the company at a price that was favorable to the company and not to him. He kept an advisory seat that pays nothing. He kept it because I asked him to, and because Helena asked him to, Brioni said, after a long second. Helena, his wife, Hollis said. Auden's voice was quiet and even. I didn't come back for credit. I came because Hollis called. Brioni turned to her father. Why did you never tell me? Because he asked me not to, Hollis said, and because you didn't need to know the history to run the company well. You have run it well. She accepted that the way she had been raised to accept hard things, which was without flinching. Hollis then laid out the situation. 3 hospital partners had reported anomalies in the differential pressure sensor over 6 months. Internal quality had classified the variances as within tolerance. He had not believed that conclusion. He had not been able to say why he did not believe it without alarming the board. Auden read the top sheet of the file for 40 seconds, then looked up. Who signed off on the supplier change for the 3rd quarter sensor lot, he said. It was not phrased as a question. Brioni pulled it up on her tablet. The signature was a single name, no cosigner. Pruitt Vance, she said. The silence in the office got heavier by a measurable amount. Auden set the file down. I'll need a quiet lab. No announcements. 3 days. You'll have it from me personally, Brioni said. She unclipped a black access badge from her own lanyard and slid it across the desk. Her fingers and his met on the polished walnut for less than a second. Both of them pulled back at the same time. Neither acknowledged it. She stood. She turned to leave, then stopped with her hand on the doorframe. I'm not going to apologize to you in this office. Not in front of my father. Not because I owe you something. Auden did not turn around in his chair. She kept going. I'll apologize to you when I know what I'm actually apologizing for. That isn't yet. He spoke without turning. That's the right way to do it. She closed the door behind her gently, the way a person closes a door when they have not yet decided what kind of person they want to be on the other side of it. The lab on 14 had not changed much. The fluorescents on the south side still flickered if you walked under them quickly. Eleanor Vosberg looked up from her bench when Auden came in, set down the calipers in her hand, and crossed the room. She did not say anything when she hugged him. He had hired her in 2014. 2 other technicians stood up from their stools and waited their turn. At the back of the lab, Marin Holloway, head of quality assurance for 15 years, watched from the doorway of her office. She did not move forward. She had been waiting 8 months for the right person to walk into the right room. She was not certain, yet, that this was that moment. She closed her office door and went back to the file she had been pretending to work on. At noon, on the 40th floor, Brioni's assistant stepped in to remind her that Ren Mercer had been signed in at the front desk for Hollis's standing Wednesday appointment. Ren had been coming to the building on Wednesdays for 2 years. Hollis called her his unofficial granddaughter when he was in a sentimental mood, which was not often. Brioni walked out to the waiting area near her father's office. A girl of 9 sat on the bench by the window, drawing in a small box of birch with a sharpened pencil. She looked up at the sound of heels and smiled with the politeness of a child raised by a careful man. You're the one on the top floor, she said. Mr. Hollis says you're very good at your job. Brioni did not know what to do with this. She sat down on the bench at a careful distance. What are you drawing? A box. For someone. It's Nitze. Ren looked at her for a beat longer than children usually do, and then asked, in the same tone she had used about traffic and patches and old shirts, Is your mother all right? Brioni was not prepared for this. The lobby that morning had not prepared her either. She found the answer somewhere she had not used in a while. My mother is gone. She passed a long time ago. Wren nodded. Mine too. She liked to draw. Brioni did not respond. She did not trust her voice. After 15 seconds, she reached for the colored pencils in the small case beside Wren and asked which colors she had in mind. They mixed 2 greens. They did not talk much. When Auden came up to collect his daughter at 1, he stopped in the corridor before turning the corner and watched the 2 of them for a moment without stepping into view. Wren looked up. Dad, Brioni stood. She did not meet Auden's eyes. She nodded to Wren. Thank you for the lesson. Wren said, any time. Auden took his daughter's hand. They walked out together. That night, alone in her office with the door closed, Brioni pulled the personnel archive she had not opened in years. She searched the surname Mercer. The system returned nothing. Every record had been retired and sealed in 2018, with the careful neutrality of a company tying off a wound. She kept scrolling. She opened the corporate bylaws, the version filed with the state of Oregon. On page 11, under the section titled Seats of the Board, she found the line she had read 100 times and never noticed. Co-founder emeritus seat, Mercer. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while. Thursday at 8 in the evening, the lab on 14 was empty, except for the 2 desk lamps Auden had left burning. He was reviewing the schematics for the second-generation differential pressure sensor, the one his name was still on at the United States Patent Office. The door opened. Maren Holloway stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and walked the length of the room to his bench. She did not greet him. She set a small black thumb drive on the corner of the table and put her hand flat on top of it for a second, before sliding it the rest of the way. I've been documenting it for 8 months, she said. Auden did not pick the drive up immediately. She kept going. Her voice was steady, but the kind of steady that has been practiced. Invoices, component lot numbers, quality inspection reports that were overwritten, emails from Pruitt asking me to adjust 3 sets of figures, the names of 2 engineers who tried to come forward and were terminated for cause, neither of which held up to anyone who actually read the file. I did not say anything until tonight, because I was not certain there was anyone left in this building they couldn't fire. She paused, and then someone walked into the lobby that they couldn't. Auden picked up the drive then. He looked at her, the way a man looks at someone who has spent 8 months alone with something heavy. Thank you, Maren. She nodded. She walked to the door. Before she opened it, she said, I knew you in 2014. You don't remember, but I do. You signed off on my hire, and she left. He plugged the drive into the air-gapped laptop in the corner. He read for 19 minutes. Then he called Brioni. She came down to the lab in a wool sweater and jeans. She had not been dressed for the building. The badge on her lanyard was the only thing on her that looked corporate. She read what he had read. Her face did not change much. By page 20 of the supplier correspondence, she had stopped scrolling and started taking notes. By page 30, she had pulled up a separate document on her tablet and started cross-referencing dates. They worked until almost midnight. The fraud was simpler than Auden had expected, and worse than Brioni had feared. Pruitt Vance had moved the third-quarter supplier contract for the differential pressure sensor to a fabrication shop in Vancouver, British Columbia, that operated without an FDA Class II certification. The cost differential, paid out through a shell company registered in the same building, came to $4.2 million over 11 months. The downstream impact was that 3 children's hospital partners had reported sensor variances in pediatric ventilators in the last 6 months. At one point, near 11, Brioni asked quietly, Wren's mother, when did she pass? Auden, without looking up from a margin note. 5 years ago. Wren was 4. She remembers her mother through the drawings Helena left her. Brioni did not ask anything else. The silence after that question was a different shape than the silences before it. They locked the lab at 11:50. They rode the elevator down together in their separate quiets. In the parking garage, before she got into her car, Brioni said, Tuesday on the sidewalk, I'm not apologizing because my father embraced you. I'm apologizing because I shouldn't have needed to see that to know I was wrong. Auden nodded once. He did not respond out loud. Sometimes a nod was the answer. Friday morning, 8:45. Pruitt Vance called Maren into his corner office on 28 and closed the door himself, which was not his habit. You've been talking to Mercer. Maren stood. She did not sit. I've been waiting 8 months to talk to the right person. He looked at her for a moment, as if trying to recognize the woman who had run his quality department without protest for half a decade. You understand what you're doing. I understand exactly what I'm doing. She walked out of his office and went back to her own. Pruitt stood at the window for almost a minute before he sat down again. By 2 in the afternoon, he had made 8 phone calls. None of them went the way he had needed them to go. At 4:15, in the parking garage on subgrade B, Pruitt stepped out from behind a concrete pillar as Auden was unlocking the driver's side of the Ford. There was no one else on the level. Pruitt had timed it. "You left this company 10 years ago," Pruitt said. He kept his voice flat. He was not raising it. "You don't have standing here." Auden kept his hand on the door handle. He did not turn the key. "I'm not standing for anything," he said. "I'm settling a debt. To the man who trusted me 15 years ago. You've misread what's happening." He opened the door, got into the truck, and turned the engine. The Ford started on the first try, the way it had every time for 2 decades. He drove away. Pruitt watched the taillights ascend the ramp. For the first time since the lobby on Wednesday, he understood that he was in trouble. That same afternoon on 43, Brioni called an emergency board meeting for Monday morning at 10. Hollis walked her through the procedural requirements. The bylaws were specific about how to remove a COO. Documentary evidence had to be circulated to the board no later than 72 hours in advance. A sealed disclosure window had to be respected to prevent insider trades on the stock. The legal calendar was tight, but it would hold. Late that afternoon, Matthias Doyle asked for 2 minutes of the CEO's time. He had not asked for that in 18 years. Brioni took him in her office. "I've been at this building a long time," he said. "I know a man in Vancouver who's been wanting to talk for 6 months. He drives a delivery truck for the shop in question. He has been waiting for somebody he could trust to listen. He won't come to the company. He'll come to a room I bring him to. He'll come Monday morning if I tell him to." Brioni looked at him for a long second. "Bring him." Matthias nodded the way he had nodded in the lobby on Wednesday morning, and left her office. That evening, Auden and Brioni worked in a small conference room on 41. The blinds were down. The lamps were on. They reviewed every document one more time, on paper, in the order in which it would be presented to the board. Around 9, Brioni closed the laptop and rested her hands flat on the table. "I used to think running this company meant knowing everything," she said. "I'm starting to think it might mean knowing what I don't know." Auden, across from her, did not look up from the page he was annotating. "That's a better starting place than most people get to." She did not respond. She opened the laptop again and went back to work. She did not say more for a while. She turned a page. Auden made a margin note in clean engineer's print. The conference room was the only lit room left on the floor. Saturday came clear. The maples on the side streets were not turning yet, but the light had started to thin the way it does in the first week of September. Brioni drove herself out to southeast Portland in her own Subaru Outback. She had not driven it in months. She wore a gray sweater and jeans and no makeup, and she did not bring an assistant. She pulled up in front of Mercer Woodworks at 9 in the morning. Wren sat on the front step, drawing on the lid of the small birch box, her tongue tucked into the corner of her mouth in concentration. Wren saw the Subaru and waved. Auden came out of the shop in his work apron and held the door open for Brioni without making it a thing. Inside the shop, Marin was already on the laptop on the bench, dialed in over video. Her kitchen table was visible behind her. She had not slept much. They went through the deck one more time. They went through it the way 3 professionals go through anything they cannot afford to be wrong about. Wren did not interrupt. She stayed on the step. Around 10:30, Brioni went to her bag and came back with a steel travel cup. She poured herself coffee from the pot Auden kept on a hot plate by the planer. At 11, Wren walked in with a cup of tea for Brioni. She set it on the corner of the workbench, the way she had seen her father do for clients. Then she opened her box and showed it to Brioni. 3 figures, painted in oil pencil on the lid. One tall, in a gray shirt, one small, with brown hair and a pencil in her hand. The third was outlined in graphite, not yet colored. "What color do you want the third one?" Wren said. Brioni did not look at Auden. He did not look up either. He had moved to a different page of the supplier file and was reading. "Pale blue," Brioni said, "like the sky early in the morning." Wren nodded. She closed the box. She walked back to the step and started mixing. They worked another 40 minutes. They closed the laptop at 11:50. Marin said goodbye and signed off. Brioni stood at the door. She had her keys in her hand and her bag over her shoulder. Auden was on the other side of the bench, marking the last clean copy of the deck. She did not say anything. She walked the 3 steps to him, put her hand on his shoulder, lightly, the kind of touch a person can choose to give and then choose to take back, and held it there for 2 seconds. He did not turn around. He nodded, once, the way he had been nodding all week. She walked out to the Subaru and drove away. That night, after Wren had gone to sleep, Auden sat at the foot of her bed for a while. On the small table beside the headboard, there was a photograph of Helena, at 28, laughing at a 1-year-old Wren, who was attempting to walk in shoes too big for her. He touched the corner of the frame. He did not pick it up. He stayed in the chair until he was sure his daughter was deep asleep, and then he went out to the shop and stayed up until the light came back. Monday morning at 10 o'clock, the board of Cassidy Mercer Precision Instruments convened in the boardroom on 43. 9 voting members. The chairman at the head of the table, the CEO to his left, Pruitt Vance in his usual seat, in a silver tie, with the expression of a man who had decided overnight that the best defense was indignation. Auden sat in the observer's chair against the wall. He had no nameplate. Brioni presented for 7 minutes. She read off the slides without looking up. The sensor comparison, the lot number trail, the shell company in Vancouver, the supplier invoices, the wire transfers, the 3 children's hospitals that had reported variances in pediatric ventilators in the second and third quarters. She did not raise her voice once. Pruitt waited her out. When she finished, he leaned back, folded his hands, and offered the board a small, regretful smile. "I'm sure there's been a procurement issue in the third quarter," he said. "These things happen. I'd like the opportunity to review with the team. As for the gentleman sitting against the wall, who I understand has been off the company's books for 10 years, I don't see what relevance his presence here has to a procurement question." Hollis Cassidy stood up. He did not speak loudly. He did not need to. "He's here because I called him, and because the M on the wall of this building is not a piece of decoration." The boardroom went still. The door opened. Marin Holloway walked in. She wore the same plain navy suit she had worn to work for a decade. She nodded to the chair. She took the seat that had been kept open for her at the foot of the table. Behind her, Matthias Doyle entered with a man in his 50s in a clean denim shirt and a worn jacket. Matthias guided him to the witness chair beside Marin. The man set a manila envelope on the table. He had signed an affidavit on Sunday evening in a notary office in Vancouver, Washington. He had brought it across the river himself. Pruitt had not known either of them would be here. Marin spoke first. She read from her own documentation. The room was silent in the way rooms get silent when something irreversible is happening. The driver from Vancouver, British Columbia, spoke second. He kept his eyes on the table. He testified that Pruitt Vance had personally directed him by text and by phone to deliver uncertified components on 6 separate occasions. He read out the timestamps. The board called for a vote at 11:34. 7 voted to terminate Pruitt Vance for cause, suspend his equity, refer the matter to the United States Food and Drug Administration, and forward the file to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Oregon. 2 abstained. 0 opposed. Pruitt stood. He gathered his folder. He walked to the door under the gaze of 9 board members, the chairman, the CEO, and the man whose name was on the wall. At the door, he stopped. He looked at Auden. Auden, from the observer's chair, did not stand. He spoke once, and his voice was even. "You could have been a good COO. You chose not to be." Pruitt walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. 3 weeks later, the maples on Hawthorne Boulevard had begun to turn. The mornings were colder. The early October light in Portland made the river look harder than it had in August. In the lobby of the Cassidy Mercer Tower, on a Tuesday at noon, the building held a small ceremony for Matthias Doyle. 18 years of service. A gold pin shaped like the company's first logo. Matthias accepted it with the same posture he had held at the front desk on the morning of Wednesday, 3 weeks earlier. His wife came to the ceremony. After it was over, she crossed the lobby to Auden, who was standing near the window, and embraced him. She said very quietly, the kind of thing a person says to someone who once helped them through the hardest year of their life. Helena had stopped by their apartment 3 times a week for a year. Auden had not known how often, until that afternoon. Marin Holloway was promoted to Vice President of Quality Assurance. A new role was created at the same time, written into the bylaws by Hollis personally, and approved by the board on a separate motion. Director of Engineering Ethics. It reported directly to the chairman, independent of the CEO, with veto authority over all medical device component decisions. Hollis announced his 18-month transition out of the chairmanship at the end of the same board meeting. He did not soften it. He said it the way he said most things. He thanked the board for their service He thanked his daughter for hers. Later that afternoon, in his office with the door closed, he said something else to Auden with no one else in the room. "Thank you for all of it, including the 10 years of silence." Pruitt Vance was indicted on 6 federal counts. 2 of the 3 hospital partners filed civil suits. He was not seen in the Pearl District again. On the first Saturday of October, Brioni drove the Subaru out to southeast Portland. She parked in front of Mercer Woodworks. She brought a single sealed envelope. Inside the envelope was a contract for the role of Director of Engineering Ethics. The terms were what they should have been from the start. He could work from the shop. He was not required at the office. The salary was the symbolic $1 a year that founders sometimes accept in lieu of arguments about money. The veto authority was absolute. Auden read it on the bench inside the shop. He folded it back into the envelope. He went to put the kettle on. Wren came in from the back room carrying the small box of birch. The lid was finished now. 3 figures, painted in oil pencil. A tall one in a gray shirt, a small one with brown hair and a pencil in her hand. A third figure, pale blue, like the sky early in the morning. She walked up to Brioni and held the box out in both hands. "You hold on to this," Wren said. "I painted it for you." Brioni took the box with both hands. She did not say anything for a few seconds. She sat down on the second step of the shop's front porch. Auden came out with 2 mugs of tea. He sat down beside her, at a distance that was neither close nor far. Wren ran out to the daisies along the fence. Neither of them had been looking for the afternoon to change, but the afternoon had changed anyway, and so had the years out ahead of it.